Hey everyone, I'm so glad to be here. My name is Mary. I am an occupational therapist here in Austin, Texas. I have my own company called Your Dementia Therapist, where I help caregivers who are taking care of a loved one who's living with dementia. I'm so excited to be partnering with Carewell today because today we're going to talk about 5 tips for communicating to your loved one who is living with dementia. These tips are so important because it's important for us as family members, as caregivers, as healthcare professionals to have a better understanding of effective ways to communicate with our loved one who's living with dementia, especially as dementia progresses from the early to the later stages. So my tip number 1 might seem a little obvious because this is something we should be doing whenever we are interacting with new people in general. But my tip number 1 is to always introduce yourself to the person who's living with dementia. If this is the first time that you are interacting with them, make sure you're approaching them slowly, you're telling them your name and a little bit about yourself. Before I ever meet someone who's living with dementia, I try to make sure that I know a little bit more about them, their name, what they used to do, any hobbies that they've had or that they're currently interested in, so I can use this in my approach whenever I do interact with them. And if they're at the stage in dementia where they're able to answer my question of tell me a little bit more about yourself, then this is also something that I will use in my approach. So my tip number 2 is to get on their level. So let's say that somebody is in a wheelchair. So something that I would do is kneel down so I can get on their level and I can make that eye contact with that individual. My tip number 3 would be to give the person who's living with dementia choices. Everyone wants to feel like they still have some sense of control and independence and purpose, right? So it's important that we still allow for this. And this might look differently throughout the stages of dementia, and something that you might find in the earlier stages that would work is asking the person who's living with dementia an open-ended question like, what do you want to eat today? But as dementia progresses, we might have to change our approach a little bit. So we might have to transition from this open-ended question of what do you want to eat today to a closed-ended question that would look like, do you want pancakes or eggs? We might even think about adding a visual to this. So grabbing that pancake box and that carton of eggs and presenting these 2 options so they can either point or tell you whichever one they would like. My tip number 4 would be to practice active listening. And I think as individuals, as human beings, we need to be practicing more of this in our day-to-day lives anyway. So active listening includes things like making eye contact, minimizing distractions, and really validating that person's question. So we might repeat that question back to the person who's living with dementia just to make them understand that they're understood. We want to make sure we're using eye contact when we're looking at them and communicating with them and turning off all those different distractions like TV, music, whenever we are engaging in a conversation with them. We want to make sure we're practicing listening to them and giving them our full attention whenever they are communicating with us, even if it might be something that we're not really understanding what they're telling us, but we still want to listen. So what happens if they're trying to tell us something and we don't understand what they're saying? Well, we want to do the best that we can to use emotion in our response and kind of mimic the emotion that they're presenting us with. So if they're telling us something and we're not sure of what they said, but they seem concerned, I might say something like, I might mimic that emotion with my facial gestures, and then I'll say something like, oh no, I'm so sorry that happened. So this will allow them to see that we are validating this concern that they have. So my tip number 5, last but not least, is to use positivity in my approach. And I am such a fan of using positivity in my approach. It has worked so well for me throughout these years. Of course, if it's in a situation where they're not in emotional distress, then this is when I would incorporate positivity into my approach. If I'm ever going into work with someone who's living with dementia and I'm gonna help them get ready for the day, I'm gonna make sure that I include positivity in my approach. I'll talk to them about what we are looking forward to doing that day, something that they enjoy doing. whenever I present their clothing options, I get excited about it. I'm like, look at this great shirt that your daughter brought you. I know that this is the one that you love to wear. And I find a little positivity goes a long way. So let me know if these tips were helpful. I hope that you've enjoyed these. Like I said, these are just some general tips that I've used throughout the years that I have found helpful. So comment below and let me know if you've used any of these tips in your approaches when communicating with someone who's living with dementia. I would love to know.